Oh, precious Lord Almighty God, touch my lips of clay that my words may not just be my words, that all may be inspired by your Holy Scripture. I'm always intensely grateful that this gospel reading doesn't occur during Lent, because if it did, I'd be dressed in purple. It's enough to make you guilty anyway, but it's complicated. It's a complex set of readings that we have today. I'm going to start with a poem. Now, traditionally, you should finish with a poem. 3 points in the poem, as Jim always says a sermon should be. But I'm going to start with one. It's by Khaled Hosseini. It's not really a poem. It's a piece of testimony, a piece of writing. It's from his book, The Kite Run. That same night, I wrote my first short story. It took me 30 minutes. It was a dark little tale about a man who found a magic cup and learned that if he wept into the cup, his tears turned into pearls. But even though he'd always been poor, he was a happy man and rarely shed a tear. So he found ways to make himself sad, so that his tears could make him rich. As the pearls piled up, so did his greed grow. The story ended with the man sitting on a mountain of pearls, knife in hand, weeping helplessly into the cup with his beloved wife's slain body in his arms. The rich man and Lazarus has been used by every conceivable party in the last 2,000 years in order to make its point, whatever it may be. And there are certain basic facts about the story which are seldom repeated, and it's helpful to know, it's always helpful to know the background. There's an Egyptian folk tale, and it's called The Journey of Osiris, and the son of Setme-Shemos, the journey of the son of Setme-Shemos to the underworld, and it concludes with the words, "He who has been good on earth will be blessed in the kingdom of the dead, and he that has been evil on earth will suffer in the kingdom of the dead." And it gives the moral lesson of a man who found himself in the underworld, who desperately besought the ruler of the underworld to send a figure equivalent to Lazarus across to cool his tongue. And the ruler of the underworld said he was unable to. And then the character of the rich man who had received many good things beseeched that the figure of poverty be sent to his brothers to save him. So it's the same story. And it was very popular amongst Alexandrian Jews. It would have been very well known. It's curious also and insightful that although it would be known at the time of Jesus, this story, Luke, and the figure of the gospel writer Luke, is often associated with a Jewish community from outside of Palestine. If you've been coming to Bible study regularly, you know this because we've been studying Luke. But don't worry, we're still studying him, so it's not too late. You can still do it. So this story would have been well known, but there's an important caveat. When it arrived into the Hebrew world, we must remember that still at that time, almost like in the Far East, where you have this idea of karmic retribution, poverty was associated with wrongdoing, and wealth was associated with doing well in the eyes of God, that there was still that assumption, and there still is today amongst many people. There's a kind of folk religion that has survived. I would say that it is a wicked heresy that makes a lot of people very miserable, but there is a folk religion that associates poverty with being out of favor with God and wealth with being in favor with God, which means that God's very unhappy with the great majority of humanity all the time, according to that. And God can also be extremely cruel, because it seems to me that wealth and happiness are not necessarily things that have any association with one another. So it's complicated. It's complicated. I think the story of Khaled Hosseini tells it well, that there was a poor man who had always been happy and found it hard to make himself miserable, to cry into this wretched cup, and had to force himself to commit gradually greater and greater tragic acts in order to make himself sorrowful as his riches accumulate. Well, wealth is one of those things that's often used in Scripture as an allegory, as an analogue for all those things which become our masters. force us into bondage, that force us into servitude. Now, the desert fathers and mothers who moved away from the society and the church, too, of their day, just a few hundred years after Christ, and moved out into the western desert of Egypt around Cetus, they were very familiar with this concept. But they believed that the thing that oppressed you, they called in general terms, was thoughts. The thoughts that beset human beings are what oppress you. And those thoughts may be anything. Those thoughts in our world are likely to be thoughts about single solutions for complex situations. They may be thoughts about wealth, because everything that is poured into us is saying that wealth is a panacea, wealth is a thing that will make you complete, that will increase your status, that will make you happy, that will give you joy in your world. Now, of course, wealth itself is not the problem. The thoughts are the problem. The thoughts that beset us, the thoughts that distort and twist us, the thoughts that make us wretched and miserable, the thoughts that, as the desert fathers and mothers would say, we have to flee from, we have to run from. So Lazarus is a name which is a Greek form of Eleazar, which means my God helps. And of course, the rich man is also given a name which is Dives, which is just Latin, Dives if you're going by the old-fashioned pronunciations, but Dives, which just means rich man. So we think they have names, but their names are actually meanings for what's supposed to be going on with them in the story. So we have the man who is in poverty, which is not necessarily an accursed state, because we're not coming to it from this angle. Lazarus seems to be in weakness and sorrow. His poverty seems to be a wretched thing, and yet his poverty sees him in the bosom of Abraham. The man who is wealthy and is in constant feasting, is beset by his wealth, is in fact a slave to his wealth. Constant feasting is anybody who's done much in the way of constant feasting knows that it is a route of misery, in the same way as being in the hands of addiction is a route of misery. Any sort of addiction, any sort of patterns of thoughts that keep us in bondage and slavery is a route to misery. So there are deeper meanings in what appears to be a very simple, almost childlike story. The rich man, terribly wicked, poor man, set upon, it all gets reversed and made well after death, there you go. Well, bear in mind that the Jews didn't believe in Hades for a start, it's a pagan term. You know, Hades is a Greek term, it's a pagan myth as far as they're concerned. They had no belief in that. So we know this was an allegorical tale. But it should make us ask some questions. And the questions that we here and now need to ask is, well, what does it mean to be free from hunger and therefore to be wealthy? That question is not as simple as it sounds. I would say that great world religions have come to very similar answers about this. I would say that the Buddhist faith, that Christian mysticism, that the mystical branches of Islam, that the mystical branches of Hinduism have all come to a very similar solution to this question. And that is to be free from desires. To be free from desires. To be able to, in whatever situation you are in, to find yourself at peace. Which means that nothing outside of yourself can ever have power over you, and that nothing inside of yourself can ever have power over you. It gives you complete freedom. It means that you can claim victory, to put it in Christian terms, no matter what has happened. That even in poverty, even in being on the streets, even in sleeping under that bridge that's right next to us, you can be victorious in your spiritual journey. That you can be raised up on one of the great ones of the faith, even though you spent your life like Lazarus. Even though, to put a behavior on this, you may have been a meth user who lived on the streets for the last 20 years. That such things are not as God sees things. And that we search within ourselves to be free from those things that oppress us. And that the ultimate freedom, that the ultimate greatness of the Spirit, that the ultimate wealth is to be able to find peace wherever, whatever, however, whoever. thought that he could find peace through the form of extreme asceticism being practiced by his fellows at the time. And remember, Buddhism is what you might call a Hindu heresy. Buddhism and Jainism are both heresies of Hinduism, if you like. Now, heresy is not one of those words we like to use when we can avoid it, because it always has negative connotations, you know, but Christianity can be viewed as a Jewish heresy, if you happen to be Jewish. Islam can be viewed as a Christian heresy, if you happen to be not Muslim. So that word heresy doesn't necessarily need to have all those bad connotations. But he was fasting, and these guys were nearly starving themselves to death. The folklore has it that he was just eating a grain of rice a day. And after a couple of years of that, well, you imagine he was feeling the pinch by then, but after a couple of years of that, he said, "Do you know, I'm not enlightened, I'm just hungry." And he decided that a middle way was needed, that this extreme athletic form of asceticism, which was huge acts of grandeur, it's like the sadhus in India perform these amazing, heroic acts of asceticism, that was not for most people, and that a middle way was needed. And he sought that middle way of being free from your desires, but not enthralled by other grandiose schemes for your own salvation. Not being a slave on the one hand to the ultra-material things, and not being a slave on the other hand to grandiose ideas of what spiritual perfection looks like, which are never going to be attainable, which you set up as false gods to worship for the rest of your life. So then he looked for the middle way and found the middle way. Well, he said, "Right, I'm just going to sit here until I find enlightenment." And he sat there like a pudding for 2 years, meditating, and then he found enlightenment. But it was not according to that heroic asceticism that his fellows practiced. So what does this mean for us? Okay, so we've touched upon the question what it means to be truly free. We're not suggesting that we go out and sit under that fig tree for the next 2 years until we find enlightenment. We need something that's a little more practical, because most of us are intending to continue to live our lives. We're going to be those people who seek our salvation in fear and trembling, but also in the world. We're not going to be those arch athletes, as it were. We're going to be people who are walking to our fate, who are walking to our salvation. And there is dignity in that. Well, how are we going to do it? Well, one of the ways we're going to do it is through fidelity, and through discipleship, and through discipline, and through accepting that it is the worthy goal. That seeking the truth, whatever that truth may be, that seeking God, whatever God may be, that seeking Jesus, whatever Jesus may be, that seeking enlightenment, seeking redemption, whatever that may be, is the overarching aim of our lives. Above all other things. Above all other things. And we have to give up a lot to understand even that. We have to understand that the God that we were brought up with might not be the God we find. That the Jesus that we were brought up with might not be the Jesus we find. That the idea of redemption that we were brought up looking for might not be the redemption we find. But when we find reality, we must embrace that reality and not stick with the tales of childhood when they do not confirm with what we experience of Almighty God in our lives. We need to accept that what a church does is it seeks to feed people and feed one another, and that we must become very good at feeding people. But if we are providing food, and a large number of people are just seeking wood alcohol or grain alcohol, then we can never satisfy them. And we cannot satisfy them just by adding booze to the food that we're providing. I use booze as a metaphor here. I'm not judging your drinking habits. I use booze as a metaphor. But fundamentally, in order to find, you must seek. And if you're not seeking, we can't provide, no matter how hard we try. But my God, we have to shout from the rooftops and give testimony that it's worth seeking, that it's worth devoting your life to finding such a truth. It is worth looking for God wherever you can find God, and that everything else is going to be dust and ashes. that it may be what you believe will make you happy, but having been there myself, this is like old-fashioned testimony, having been there myself and lived that life of ease, I can tell you it's dust and ashes, it is misery. The leisure you crave always turns out to be your biggest enemy. The devil makes work for idle hands. Sweet Jesus does it out. The devil makes work for idle hands. What we think we want is not going to serve us. This town, these cities are full of people who came to Palm Springs seeking ease and believing it will make them happy, and then they find themselves directionless and they fall into the most profound misery I have seen in many of the peoples I've traveled in the world. I have been to the slums of Sri Lanka and Egypt, and I've seen more misery on a Friday night in Palm Springs amongst well-heeled folk than I have seen in those places, because there's no purpose and no direction. There's no searching for truth. There's just a desperate attempt to divert themselves from the boredom which blights their lives. And I apologize for speaking out like this, but you know, it's a great misery and a great evil in the world. We are surrounded by it. We need direction, we need hope, we need purpose. We need a framework, we need discipleship, we need church, not brunch. Or if we're going to do brunch, we need to do it after church. We need to accept that some things are worth standing up for and saying, this I need in my life, and you need it too. We need to be able to give that testimony and say, look, you can go and divert yourself all you like for the rest of the week, and it won't get you anywhere. But you know, search for something that is truthful and meaningful. Search for it. Come and search with us. Help us how to search better. Show us how to search better. Feed into us. Feed us and we'll feed you. But if all you're looking for is another diversion, we're not going to be able to help you. So what you're doing, wasting time before the grave. Gosh, that's never far away. Blimey, this is dark stuff.
Right.
Woo, dear, oh dear. Hallelujah, it's got a good Holy Ghost, you see. I'm going to end it in a minute, don't worry. I'm not going to go on too long. Oh God, where's this coming from? Woo! Dear Lord, he's already dangled half of Palm Springs over the pit. Seems the pit is real, the pit is here, the pit is not some future state. You know, the pit's all around us, Jesus. Mary and Joseph. So we have a great task before us. We have a great task because America is going down a road that Europe went down many years ago, and it's an understandable road. It is disillusionment with the social conventions of church attendance, with no imperative for that spiritual search, and no mystery. None of those things which allow grandeur and light into our lives, into our personal lives, into our daily lives. Everything becoming humdrum and mundane. The mysteries of the Christian faith being boiled down to a few catchphrases uttered by Joel Osteen. God bless him. He needs God's blessing.
Yeah.
Or Richard Rohr. God bless him. He needs God's blessings. So what can we do? Well, we can have some gumption, and we can have some fire in our bellies, and we can take ownership over our spiritual journey, and we can do it in a way that is kind and compassionate, that seeks to find the many and obvious ways where we are joined to other people, which are always more abundant than the ways in which we are separated. And we can start asking insightful questions of ourselves, and the way they play out in our lives may be inspirational to others. Because the levels of unhappiness in our society are overwhelming. And we all speak to each other with masks on our faces. There's hardly any real conversation that's going on about the disillusionment and misery that so many people feel. It's diverted into spite and projection. Our political landscape is devastating and devastated at the moment, as so is our social landscape. So, let's do something about it. Ours is on seats. That's a good way. Yeah. All the various different ways in which you can be church, in which you can show that little extra, because what you don't realize, what you really don't realize, and I don't sometimes, is that my presence is salutary. Your presence is salutary. something you say, something you are, some gesture that you give on this day may be overwhelming for someone else. You won't get to know it. It may not be bells and whistles, but it may be transformational.
Yes.
And you have to plant those seeds. You don't know what's going to happen.
Yes.
So I'll close by saying, Bobby Joe Valentine came last night. Oh, he had 40 people. Wonderful. It would be nice to have more. Although it was untested. Most people didn't know what they were getting themselves into. It was worth it numerous times over, because a testimony I've had from people is that he put fire in their belly, that he spoke to something which was a reality in their lives, that he elevated to art what previously had just been a shameful suffering to people.
Yes.
And that's what our faith can do. It can lift into glory what had simply been shame and sorrow for us. What had just been a memory that embarrassed us and caused us misery is lifted into glory. That the cross, which was a cross of shame, becomes the central focus of our redemption, our joy and our deliverance. And this works itself out in every part of our lives. We are not a forsaken people. We are a people who dwell in glory. We might as well start living like we do. Amen.